The following program is a production of the Fairfax Network, Fairfax County Public Schools.
Welcome to Community Keynotes, Safeguarding Mental Wellness. This program was recorded during a special presentation at Woodson High School in Fairfax, Virginia. The keynote presenters are Dr. Scott Poland, licensed psychologist and professor at the Center for Psychological Studies at Nova Southeastern University in Florida, and Richard Lieberman of the Los Angeles County Suicide Prevention Network. Both speakers have lectured extensively on school crisis, suicide intervention, school safety, threat assessment, and parenting. They speak to parents and community members about the key factors in ensuring mental wellness for our students and in identifying when they may be at risk. For more on the topic, here is Dr. Scott Poland.
You know, perhaps Mark Twain expressed it pretty well when he talked about children's development. He said, when I thought I was only 7 and I thought my parents knew everything. When I was 14, I thought they knew nothing at all. When I was 21, I could not believe how much they had learned in only 7 years. And I believe everything is actually advanced today, which means an 11 or 12-year-old today is exposed to things that a 14 or 15-year-old was exposed to not that long ago. Here we are. Unfortunately, children in America are dying in nearly record numbers. Number 1 is an accident. Number 2 is a homicide. Number 3 is a suicide. And Rich and I have actually responded to a number of those horrific school shootings. I've now responded to 15 of those. And you know what I really believe with most tragedies that affect a young person could have been prevented. Not all. And I'm here tonight to say, I know we cannot prevent every youth suicide. But I do believe strongly that we can prevent the majority of them. And some of you undoubtedly are survivors of some of the suicides that have occurred, or maybe it was a relative of yours or a friend a long time ago. I think I have some idea what you've gone through. My father shot himself when I was 25 years old, and I'm a good example of someone who thought it could never happen in my family. So if you're really affected by the loss of someone close to you, I think I have some idea of what you've gone through. But I believe strongly in prevention, promoting mental health. What can we all do? And we must work harder. Our Surgeon General said it pretty well. 38,000 suicides a year in this country. We got to talk about it more. Our homes, our schools, our churches, and our neighborhoods. All right, moving on. Mental health. You know, the other day I brought it up in my graduate class, and when I talked about mental health, immediately the students started talking about mental illness. It's really all about wellness, the ability to manage stress, to be able to be resilient and bounce back with the ups and downs that we all have. And it's about being a productive member of our society. There behind me, you see some of the figures about mental health problems on young people. We've known really for decades that large percentage of our young people have mental health problems. So here's the frustration I've had working in the schools for all those years. We identify a problem. We talk with the parents. We figure out where are the best resources to help this child and family, and unfortunately, the family doesn't follow through. So we're always battling the stigma of getting mental health treatment. And I did a webinar just yesterday, and the person on the webinar with me who's in school security shared with everybody, you know, I had 3 children, and at one time or another, I needed to get mental health treatment for all 3 of those children. There's a lot of information out there indicating that about 1 in 5 teenagers suffers from depression at some point in their teenage years. And the bottom line is most of the time it's untreated or it's undertreated. So we have to make sure that we get treatment for our family members when they need it. Now, just a couple of general things that I believe really strongly about raising kids, especially adolescents. And of course, the bottom line is It's not enough to know your kids' friends. You got to know the kids' friends' parents. You have to be the one that makes the call, the one that checks. And I still remember the first party we had when our youngest was a high school student, and we were only supposed to have a certain number of young people over to our house. Well, the numbers were far greater than we ever expected. And how many families do you think called and asked some questions about the party the Polands were hosting? That would be one call out of 50 families. How many parents do you think came to the door? Because nobody was even old enough to drive yet. One dad came to the door, and I was like, "Sir, come on in. I could really use some help here." So really important that we network. I also caution you not to set your adolescent's room up to be a little kingdom. Let's be honest. If in my room I have my television, my internet access, my phone, my movies, my music, why am I coming out? There's only one reason. Kim made dinner. But watch me try to take that plate of food and I'm going to go eat it back in isolation. McDonald's says they have the full value meal. But do you know where it really is? It's around your kitchen table with free and easy communication between children and parents. And it's all about finding the time when your kid will talk to you. Our son loved basketball. So what did that mean? It means I put a goal outside because it was something he really enjoyed doing. I put lights out there. Anytime, day or night, Jeremy knew if I was home, I would rebound for him. I'd go out there. I'm not saying a word. All I'm doing is catching the ball and a nice chest pass back. Pretty soon, because he's relaxed, doing something he enjoys, he's talking to me about what's going on in high school. And I respond with something incredibly insightful based on years of graduate study when I said, yeah, that's a hard one, son. I'm not sure. What are you thinking? The one thing I can guarantee you is your children don't want you to say, do this, do that, you won't have a problem. They just want you to listen to them. And you have to figure out when are the times that they will get relaxed and talk to you. And somehow I doubt that I'm the only person in this room that suffered a divorce. Okay, Jill was 10. You know what really helped? My ex-wife is a psychologist. We sat down. We made a pact. Don't talk badly about me to our children, and I will not talk badly about you. I never have. By the way, do you think there were times that when Jill would complain about her mom that I wanted to say a few things? But I never did. I had a couple of simple thoughts. Isn't she always going to be my daughter's mother? Doesn't she deserve my respect? And certainly she deserved financial support until Jill became of age. One thing I'm really excited about tonight is seeing a lot of dads here. The literature says really clearly, when dads are involved in children's lives, they are healthier, they are happier, and they achieve better at school. Margaret Mead had a great quote. Perhaps the true measure of a society is, can we teach the men to be good fathers? And I'm sure that we have involved dads that are good fathers. I just wish we had every student's dad here tonight, because that communication between mom and dad is so critical. Now, technology, wow, it's incredible in so many ways, but I'm going to ask you to think about setting some limits. That technology is a privilege. It is not a right. And I want to give you an example from speaking in Atlanta a few months ago. I did a parent session very much like this, and I talked about the fact that the literature says high school kids are chronically sleep deprived. They stay up too late, they get up too early. So I was saying something pretty simple about the phone. By the way, does anybody remember when there was actually a cord on the telephone? I grew up in a house where there was a cord on the one phone in our house, and I believe that cord was maybe about 3 feet long. And I swear to you, my mom sat next to it my entire adolescence. Was I on the phone in the middle of the night? Did my friends call me at 3 in the morning? No. Now, there's no easy answer, but my message to those parents in Atlanta was, have your daughter give you her phone. It's 10:30, honey. It's bedtime. It will be charged, and I will hand it back to you in the morning. So a mom stayed to talk to me, and she said, but what if my 8th grade daughter's friends wanted to talk to her at 3 in the morning? They wouldn't be able to reach her. Well, Mom, what's wrong with your daughter's friends, like talking to their own parents? Or I guess you could answer the phone at 3 in the morning. But the saddest thing is I didn't convince her, and I'm still at a loss. Why is it so important to her that her daughter be available 24/7 to all of her friends? I gave a talk for 6th grade parents recently with pretty much the message that I just went over about take charge of that technology. I almost wanted to have all the 6th grade parents stand up and repeat after me, I am the parent. My happiness cannot depend on whether or not my child is happy with me right now. But I didn't quite go to that length. But the principal came home, because she's my wife, and she said, well, the 6th grade parents loved what you had to say, but they want you to come back. Why would I come back? They want you to tell their children why they're going to do things differently. The greatest danger to all of your children is getting in a car. And Gandhi had a great quote. He said, what we do speaks so loudly to our children that when we try to talk to them, they cannot hear us. They're watching everything we do. Do we click our seatbelt? Do we drink and drive? Do we text or talk on the cell phone while we drive? And there's so many things that can be done with that phone to take charge of the technology. You can have it so it doesn't work in a moving vehicle. You can have it so it doesn't take calls during the homework hours. Just know there's a wealth of ways that you can take charge of that technology. And I'm sure there's excellent resources here to help you understand how you could know more. What is the latest in terms of social media? What is the latest way to know what's going on and to take charge of that phone? Moving on. All right, let's see. One of the things I believe strongly is that all kids misbehave, but we need to be careful to always separate the misbehavior from their worth as a person. I can honestly tell you, not only did Jill never receive any kind of physical punishment, she was never called a name, not in her entire life. I'm very disappointed with this specific behavior. But your worth as a person and my love for you is never going to be in question. Now, Jill went to a massive high school in Texas. She actually came home in the middle of the school year as a senior and said, Dad, the teacher doesn't know my name. I mean, some days she gets it right, but she has me confused with 2 other girls with brown hair and braces. You know, since I believe she's one of the most wonderful girls who ever lived, can you see how frustrating that would be? You know, I sincerely hope for every single one of you, you believe your sons and daughters are the most wonderful kids who ever lived. Not for the person you hope they will become someday, but just for the person they are today. And what I hope you will do tonight is go home and show them how much you care about them and how much you love them. If you do that, you have given them a tremendous advantage in this world. I get asked this question a lot. He likes violent video games. Should I be worried? Okay, well, tell me more about him. Well, he's really sweet to his little sister. He's in an organized something in the school and the community. Yes, he goes somewhere with mom and dad once in a while. He does a good job taking care of the family pet. I'm going to relax. I just gave you very positive indicators about being a kid. In fact, you know what being a kid what the work of a kid really is, let me simplify it for you. 2 things. Get along with the people in their lives. That would be their siblings, their neighbors, the people at church, the people at school. Number 2, have reasonable academic progress at school. And I didn't shower Jill with rewards because I feel guilty. I missed another volleyball game, I was out of town, or I didn't shower with rewards because I was in a good mood or I just got paid. I was always thinking, how is she doing with the work of being a kid? And counseling students for many, many years. So let's call the kid Tom. It's Friday. Tom is the kid I counsel at school, only he's not there today. Assistant principal says, sorry, you're going to have to wait until Monday. His behavior was such I suspended him from school. Monday morning, Tom comes in, shows me the new shoes that were purchased for him over the weekend at the mall. They light up. He's got a new watch. He's got a new shirt. And I'm really at a loss to explain. Your kid was suspended from school on Friday. You took him to the mall for a shopping spree. Back to the rewards when you're doing a good job with the work of being a kid. Now I started talking about warning signs. But what if you tell me he's really mean to his little sister? What if you tell me he's not involved in an organized anything in the school and the community? What if you tell me he is isolated from all adults and he tried to microwave the cat last weekend? I'm going to be very concerned. And I'm going to be as persuasive and persistent as I can be. We need mental health interventions for this particular child. And behind me, you see restitution. You make a mistake, you hurt somebody's feelings. At a very early age, we need to apologize. And kids do need to be held accountable. There needs to be consequences. And by the way, a message I always have for parents is this simple. Support the school. A recent example. Kid's mad at the principal, slams the door on his way out with all of his might, cracks the door frame. $275 to repair it. So we figured out, first of all, shouldn't the kid have to pay for the damages? Okay, but he doesn't have any money. All right, we anticipated that. John, you'll be staying after school every day, helping the custodian until you have paid off your debt. Except John doesn't stay after school at all. About a week later, the principal calls. We got a check in the mail. They turned it into their homeowners. Is that what we wanted? At an early age, kids need to make restitution. Now, what are the things that protect children? And these come, by the way, from the World Health Organization. Obviously, we want them to have a good relationship with other young people. But what I've found is, who does one disturbed kid go to for help? Another disturbed kid. And between the 2 or 3 of them, they don't know enough to get an adult involved. And it's also interesting to ask kids themselves, why didn't you go to the adult for help when somebody was talking about homicide or suicide? Usually they say something like this. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't think it could happen. I feared retaliation. I've been conditioned not to tell. Or the thing that bothers me the most is when they say, I'm sorry, but I don't trust that the adults in my life could be that helpful and could have really intervened to do anything. Seeking adult help when needed is critically important. Lack of access to suicidal means, guns still remain a very common method of suicide in America. And I just always think pretty simply, perhaps the 11th commandment for a gun owner should be, when you know there's a disturbed, depressed, impulsive, substance-abusing person right in your own home, then I think it's very important that a gun not be left available to them. Religion, whether it's the mosque, the synagogue, or the church, is a very important place for kids to get that sense of belonging. And by the way, Maslow was the guy that had it right. Maslow had the pyramid theory. And basically, what's at the foundation for all of your children? hopefully a sense of safety and security and belonging in their home, school, and neighborhood. And if we were to visit the Center for Disease Control website and look at national suicide prevention goals, the key words would be connections and collaboration between communities and school. Family cohesion and stability, very, very important. And having our children with problem-solving skills, always being optimistic about the future. You know, Jeremy was 8, and I sat down with him and I said, "Son, we need to talk more about the death of the grandfather you never met." He says, "I already know what happened to him. You told me he had a heart attack." Yes, that's true, Jeremy. He did have a heart attack. But there's a little more to the story. Now that you're 8, I think maybe you can understand what I'm about to say. And I want you to hear this from me, never from someone else. Your grandfather shot himself. He died by suicide. He looks at me and said, "You lied." "No, son, I didn't really lie. I just waited for you to grow up a little bit to give you the complete details about this." Then he thinks and thinks a while and he says, "Oh, Dad, you shouldn't feel bad." "Well, why is that?" "Well, your parents, they weren't both psychologists like mine are. They couldn't possibly have taught you all the things I know about the importance of feeling good about yourself and being able to solve problems." Now, wasn't it sweet? He was trying to alleviate my guilt. But what do we all wish? Wouldn't you like to sprinkle magic dust over every kid that walks into a Fairfax County school tomorrow, and all of a sudden they feel and know that they're a good person, that people love and care about them, and whatever comes along, there is going to be help available. So those problem-solving skills are really important. I've already talked about connections and extracurricular participation. But my wife's at a private school today, and when I talk to those parents, the expectations are quite high. And the kids are involved in a lot of advanced placement classes. They're involved in a lot of extracurricular activities, and sometimes the school team, the club team, the community play, the dance recital, it causes a lot of stress. And I like to suggest to those parents, what about one activity a season? Don't you want your kid's life to revolve around your family? And I think things are going to work out. I'm a pretty good example of an underachiever in high school. I didn't make the top 25% of my class. I actually got kicked out of college the first time for poor academics. Well, I do have 3 degrees today. I have a 5th book coming out. So if there's a little stumble, it's not the end of the world. Actually, I had to go to 5 colleges, 2 community colleges. And at my wife's school, of course, they would turn up their nose at the idea of going to a community college. But one more quick example to make a point. So she had me go to lunch. She said, "Scott, this guy wants to talk to you about his son. He's having a lot of problems with him. He's a junior in high school." "Oh, yeah, he's probably the richest man you're ever going to meet. He buys and sells corporations. You know that huge yacht we saw on the Intercoastal? That's his. It's one of the 10 largest in the world." So we go to lunch, and he says to me, "I figured out what I'm going to do with my son, Scott. I can afford it. I'm going to buy the best life coach money can buy to work with my son." I thought to myself, I could be a life coach. I'm a licensed psychologist. Doesn't that count? But I think you can probably figure out what I said to him. Be his dad now. Buy a few less companies. Take him to board meetings. In a year and a half, he's undoubtedly leaving your home to go out of state to college. Be involved in his life now. The warning signs. The most common ones are things they write and things they say, dramatic changes in their behavior, giving away of prized possessions, making out a will. And obviously, I stressed earlier, get professional help for your child when these behaviors are occurring. Don't be afraid to ask. Everything in the literature says we have to be direct. Are you thinking about giving up? We need to get you some help. You're not the first kid to feel this way. I know where help is available. And then all over the Fairfax County website are an incredible amount of resources, and the local crisis link line, the national crisis hotline numbers. It's really important that kids have those numbers. 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-1-800-SUICIDE. Doesn't matter where you are in this country, you're connected with the nearest crisis hotline. By the way, most of those calls are not about suicide. They're about stress. They're about problems. They're about difficulties with parents and difficulties with peers. And sometimes in our low-income families, those calls are about the electricity's been turned off, or there's not enough food in the house for dinner. So we all have to know those warning signs. Now, I have been working in this field now for 33 years. I'm going to be honest and tell you my greatest frustration. By the way, a long time ago, I quit worrying about what anybody was going to think about what I had to say. Here's my frustration. The medical community, for the most part, is not involved. About 70% of the time, the person who died by suicide went to see the family doctor. And they need to be much more comfortable asking direct questions about hopelessness, not wanting to live, or this injury, it seems like a strange one. Were you trying to harm yourself? Is that how this happened? So we've had this national recommendation for 5 years. Every teenager seeing the physician for any reason should fill out one of those questionnaires, and it should be scored before they leave the office. My greatest hope is the physicians in training now. Nova Southeastern University, where I work, has a medical school. And we do get to train those students about suicide assessment and intervention. But traveling around the country, going into communities that have experienced staggering tragedies, the one group that never seems to come to the table are the physicians. Law enforcement's there, mental health is there, community leaders, school leaders, clergy, survivor groups, but we've got to get the medical community more involved in suicide prevention.
Community Keynotes Safeguarding Mental Wellness will continue with more in a moment.
Want to learn more about Fairfax County Public Schools? The FCPS Newshour is a news and information program that highlights instructional excellence as well as important school initiatives and events. There are hundreds of videos available online.
And now, part 2 of Community Keynotes Safeguarding Mental Wellness.
Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about some tough topics. In LAUSD, the suicide prevention program had 3 components to it. It had a prevention component. When I looked for model practices in 1986, at the top of the list were gatekeeper programs. Gatekeeper programs that are firmly in place here in Fairfax County. Okay, gatekeeper programs, and I found this out coordinating the program, understand that suicidal kids don't self-refer. They don't walk into their counselor's office, say, I'm thinking of killing myself, please stop me. Okay? But 8 out of 10 say something, do something, write something, or draw something that comes to the attention of another party. Now, we always look through crisis through 2 lenses, and the first is a developmental lens. So we look at how do elementary school kids differ from high school kids? Well, who do elementary school kids talk to? They talk to the trusted adults around them at school, they talk to their parents, and they talk to their peers. But as Scott pointed out, when we move up to secondary and we move up to high school, who is the kid most want to talk to in times of crisis? Another kid, okay? So all of these people, adults at school, adults at home, peers, are gatekeepers. The second component was an intervention component. And for an intervention component, I found that first we needed the best practices for intervening with suicidal students when checking out all the paperwork here and the policies and procedures here. I was very impressed with all best practice strategies in the referral of suicidal students. I also saw that a hotline was, towns that had hotlines in the 80s had lower suicide rates than those that didn't. So being the entire suicide prevention unit, how could I possibly adopt a hotline to the schools? Well, first, it wasn't going to be a hotline for depressed kids. It was going to be a hotline for crisis team members like psychologists, counselors, social workers, and nurses, and school administrators. For 25 years, if you needed immediate guidance and support when intervening with a suicidal student, you could call me up. And that's why I love my family very much. Because, you know, in the very beginning, I had like pagers, and then beepers, and then I had the brick. I used to get calls like, excuse me a second, I have to go into the parking lot. So for 25 years, I took about 800 to 1,000 calls a year. Okay, about 20,000 calls overall. Top 3 facts. First, 1 out of 2 phone calls came from elementary schools. You might be surprised to hear that, but we have young children in elementary schools exhibiting self-injurious behavior. I'm going to talk a little bit about non-suicidal self-injury in a minute. But I can remember on the hotline the day my 5th grade boys found the razor in the pencil sharpener. Okay? I firmly ask, I've been on a soapbox for a long time, to all elementary school principals, we need to ban the pencil sharpener. Okay? There's no need for this little plastic sharpener. And that 3/4-inch blade, once it's discovered, it can be used for self-injurious behavior around school. 1 out of 4 phone calls had to do with self-injurious behavior. We also found that there were 2 times of the year the phone rang off the hook. Everybody tends to think the highest risk month of the year is December. No. It's actually the lowest risk month of the year. The highest risk months of the year, October and November, off the chart. And sadly, within Los Angeles, I have always had high-profile deaths by suicide during that period. The second period is Mondays and Fridays in March, April, and May that match the national hotlines. So right now, in school staff, and we'll be talking to staff tomorrow, and mental health staff have been intervening with high-risk kids at record levels. Okay? The last component of the suicide prevention program was postvention, and I do have to say it was the most difficult part of my job, going out into the communities in the aftermath of a death by suicide. When a student died by suicide, purely anecdotally, over the next days, weeks, and months, we could hospitalize as many as 5 to 8 kids. Sadly, the last 2 years, we have had deaths by suicide occur on campus, where the degree of impact was huge. Surviving staff and students all struggling in the aftermath. How could this have been prevented? Why did this happen? Questions that we can't answer. Sometimes media loves to do a quick fix. In today's instantaneous world, quick fix. The drugs did it. The breakup did it. Struggling with sexuality issues did it. And I think these communities, my communities, really needed to hear that suicide is so complex that no one person, no one thing is ever to blame. We're going to talk a little bit about depression. As you can see, and as Scott pointed out, that untreated depression can lead to substance abuse, academic failure, and even suicide. Generally, in a microcosm of a suicide attempt, there are two factors that come together to propel a kid down the self-destructive path. The first is a chronic factor. Consider it the fuel. Okay? 95% of those that die by suicide have some form of mental illness. 60% of the time, that mental illness is a mood disorder or depression. As you can see that by estimates, at the end of the teen years, that 20% of adolescents will have suffered from depression, and the majority will not receive treatment for it. Let's take a look at some of the symptoms, and as you read these symptoms, you're going to say, boy, that sounds like me on a Monday. Irritable and cranky, loss of interest. This is where depression in children looks very much like depression in adults. Withdrawing from friends and family, having serious changes in appetite, in sleeping habits, making negative comments about themselves. The interesting factor here is it's more than just feeling sad. And an individual or a child, an adolescent, cannot just snap out of it. There are two factors that distinguish clinical depression from feeling sad. And the first is it has to persist for 2 weeks or longer. Okay? It has to not only persist for 2 weeks or longer, but it has to interrupt your daily activities. And when we took a look at some of the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey, let's take a look at some of the results for Virginia. You take a look, the US averages is off to the side. About 1 in 4 children answered yes to the question, did you feel so sad or hopeless for a period of 2 weeks or more that you stopped doing some normal activities? Okay, 1 out of 4. Actually, when we fine-tuned it just to Fairfax County, it came out 1 out of 3 students. So imagine the teacher of a class of 30 students where 10 students are not really there that day for reading, math, or spelling. If a student is depressed, they're coming to school for the connectedness. In Los Angeles, they're coming to school because schools are safer than their home environment, and they know that. And it is much better for students to attend school. What I did notice in the Virginia statistics was you were above the average for those students that reported making an attempt, making a suicide plan, and those actually reporting making an attempt. What I also noticed was of the kids that make an attempt in Virginia, only 1 out of 3 actually get to medical attention. So why do you think they pick a period of 2 weeks or more? Because that is the clinical definition in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for a diagnosis of depression. But depression in kids sometimes doesn't look like depression in adults. And we start to see risky forms of behaviors, kids that are acting out. So examples of risky behaviors, kids who drink and drive, text and drive. We have kids in one of my neighborhoods, the back of Palos Verdes empties into San Pedro, and as It goes downhill. It is a straight road down. And kids were getting on skateboards, trying to get their skateboards up to 50 miles an hour. Okay? Risky kinds of behaviors in order to feel something. And that's what's also related to self-injurious behavior. There are 3 kinds of depression. One is profound and of short duration. That is called major depression. One is of less intensity, but lasts for a longer period of time. That is known as dysthymia. And the third kind of depression is the diagnosis most often linked with suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts and non-suicidal self-injury. Anyone venture a guess? It is bipolar depression. The good point is that depression is treatable. There are evidence-based treatments. Now, of course, we take a look at some of those treatments. In 2003, the suicide rate in America had declined for 2 decades for youth. And an organization, an association came out and took credit for it. Do you know which organization that was? The American Medical Association. They came out and they said, it's because of Prozac. Okay? Now, of course, as soon as they came out and said that in 2003, my phone started to ring off the hook. I, of course, said I would feel a whole lot better knowing all of my students that were on SSRIs or Prozac actually got there through the diagnosis of a child psychiatrist. But who is the #1 prescriber of antidepressant meds? The family doctor, absolutely. And in Los Angeles, I have a diverse population. I have many, many parents who, upon hearing your child is depressed and could benefit from counseling, are more likely, and I believe they do this in the very best interests of their children, they're more likely to take their child to the doctor, the church, or the mall before they'll seek help for mental health services. Actually, there was a major study. Major study had 4 groups. Those kids got Prozac. Some kids got a sugar pill. Some kids got cognitive behavioral therapy. And some kids got a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy and Prozac. Which group, of course, showed the best progress? The combo therapy. In times, medication alone was completely ineffective. And what was very important to us in the schools is we're kind of afraid to talk to each other about these things. We're afraid to share with the school our child is on medication. However, it is absolutely critical that everybody got on the same page. There's a doctor, there's an agency for counseling, there's the home, there's the school. We need to create a circle of care around each child. Everybody's got to talk to each other. We have like FERPophobia in schools. We're afraid to talk. And it's so important when kids are on medication because we have to watch the impact of that medication for the first 6 weeks. And a teacher, a parent who know the child the best, when they would say to me on a hotline, this behavior is not like this child at all, that would jump out at a hotline operator. A sudden change in behavior indicates the second factor is happening. Remember I said there were 2 factors that come together? One is a chronic factor, the fuel of mental illness. The other is an acute factor, a precipitating event of some kind. Let's talk a little bit more about youth suicide. Here's the thing. There are no predictors of youth suicide. The best thing the schools have to assess risk, what's the best predictor of future behavior? Past behavior. So if a child has attempted before, they are at greater risk for attempting a second time. Okay? But that's it. We have there are no predictors. So if there are no predictors, then there's no way for us to really know which child, low, moderate, or high risk, will go on to make a suicide attempt. So what that means for us in the schools is we have to be vigilant 24/7. And we have to follow through even with low-risk kids and follow best practice, which is to notify the home, to make notification to someone on the emergency card, and to provide some kind of assistance. Once again, we mentioned that suicide cannot be simplified. That acute factor, oftentimes the precipitating event, will get labeled as the cause. And it's not. It's a precipitating event that ignites the fuel of depression. Children are not suicidal 24/7. We've had kids referred as high risk at 8 o'clock in the morning. It will take 3 hours possibly for an SRO, law enforcement, or in Los Angeles, a psychiatric mobile response team to come to the school. And by the time they come to the school hours later, the child has decreased in risk. Why did that happen? Because of the connectedness at school. Schools are going to do two things upon a child exhibiting a warning sign. They're going to supervise that child, and they're going to notify someone on the emergency card in a very timely fashion. The national motto is everyone plays a role in suicide prevention. Here are some of the risk factors, though. You have to envision it as like Main Street. There are 7 lights on Main Street. In order for a kid to go from thinking about harming themselves to harming themselves, all 7 of those lights have to turn green in a perfect storm. The bad news is if all the lights turn green, a kid can go from thinking about harming themselves to harming themselves in less than 4 minutes, especially if the second light is green, and Scott's already talked about the presence of a firearm. Alcohol and substance abuse. When have you seen alcohol or substances actually add to the decision-making process? My students at Loyola Marymount University during spring break last year, a group of them thought it'd be really fun to drunk dial Professor Lieberman. I said, who among you thought this was a good idea? And I want everybody's keys. All right? Internal factors. Depression we've talked about. Previous attempts. A history of trauma. External factors. Stressors. What are some of those precipitating events? Let's take a look at those. I found very similar information in your in the report, Suicide in Fairfax County. When they took a look at those who died by suicide here in Fairfax County, they did find the presence of common risk factors. Many had been suffering from depression. Many had been involved with alcohol and substance abuse. Many had made previous attempts. But when we looked at populations of kids, we didn't see it in the same incidence that we saw it in adults. What we did find was a precipitating event in the vast majority of cases. And with kids, the most common was loss. Now take a look at the losses up there: death, divorce, transience, romance, the loss of dignity and humility. Which do you think are the top 3 losses for kids? Well, it's a little difficult to go to audience participation, so you see when a death by suicide occurs in the community, there is over a 300% chance another one will occur, so everything leads back to suicide prevention. However, that loss was number 2 on the list. Number 3 was the loss of dignity, when kids are bullied, humiliated in front of others, particularly those in LGBTQ populations. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, what's the Q? Questioning. Everybody thought it was going to be queer? No. Questioning youth. What they found was, I'm asked all the time, are LGBT kids at naturally high risk for suicide? and I am not convinced. When gay kids grow up in nurturing homes and affirming environments, the research says they show no greater risk than their heterosexual peers. Number one loss, boyfriend-girlfriend breakup. Now, I'm looking around. This is an incredibly attractive audience, so nobody has ever broken up with you before. But I was not always the buff dude you see before you tonight. And I really hate that that joke works. Twice. I was broken up with. I went to camp. 8 weeks, 12 girls. I dated all 12 girls, 8 weeks, right? And they all broke up with me. It was the summer of '63. A very diverse group. I heard, can we still be friends in 4 different languages? The two most associated with school are an academic crisis or a disciplinary crisis. The two most associated with the home are argument with parent or witnessing or experiencing domestic violence. Just a couple of tips in terms, because when we take a look at the risk factors for youth, you see at the very end, non-suicidal self-injury. Scott and I are going to be doing a series of webinars for the school district, and one of the topics that has been requested, we're going to talk a lot more about non-suicidal self-injury. This field is evolving as we speak. The first chapter we ever wrote in 2004 was called Self-Mutilation. The follow-up chapter in 2008 was Self-Injury, and in 2010, Non-Suicidal Self-Injury, built right into the title that kids are not self-injuring in a suicide attempt. It's just the opposite. They are self-injuring to try to feel better. Connect with compassion, with caring, with concern, and understand that this is your child's way of trying to cope with overwhelming emotions. At the top of the don't list is, first, I would never discuss a child's self-injurious behavior in the presence of other kids or other adults. That's a conversation to be had privately. Don't be afraid to talk to your child about suicide and about self-injury. You will not put ideas in their heads. But the most important thing is never tell a child, just stop doing that. We don't want to take away their very last coping mechanism. So what we want to do is encourage better coping strategies rather than cutting. How to distract, to teach a child that you have control over your thoughts. Your thoughts do not have to distress you. And I just wanted to review at the very end the parent role. As we've said, do not be afraid to talk to your child about suicide, self-injury. You will not be putting ideas in their head. You want to know the risk factors and warning signs as we've described them this evening. And if your child says something, does something, writes something, or draws something that comes to your attention, act immediately. Offer to reach out to your child and to get help at the school, in the faith-based community, in the mental health community here in Fairfax County. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Scott for a few more.
We have just a couple more slides we'd like to share with you. We do need to take bullying seriously. Here is the one thing as adults that we need to make sure we emphasize. You do not deserve this. No, you are not bringing this upon yourself. We are going to get this stop. I am there for you every step of the way. We do know there's a strong association between bullying and suicide. As Rich was emphasizing, there's no single cause when there's a death by suicide. Bullying certainly could be a contributing factor. Associated, yes. Causality, no. And of course, it's extremely important that kids always feel safe in their schools. And I want to say to you, and I really want to emphasize this, schools are actually the safest places children go. You actually want to save lives of kids in America. Longer school day, longer school year, we would save lives. I also want to caution you to pay attention to the developmental level of children and the things that they view. We could spend a long time on this, but perhaps a simple example. 6-year-old's having nightmares, doesn't want to sleep by himself anymore, conference with the parents. Well, we like all the horror movies. He watches them with us. Doesn't that make it okay? No, developmentally, it is not okay. What do kids really need? And what is this word resiliency? I'm going to argue it's the biggest word in all of psychology post 9/11 in this country. It is the ability to bounce back. I imagine most of you can think of someone that endured a staggering tragedy. They got up, they went back to work, they didn't turn to alcohol, they certainly didn't end their life. Hopefully they even reinvested in other relationships. But you could also think perhaps of someone, it was like their life was over. No, they didn't go back to work. Maybe they did turn to drugs, including alcohol. Sadly, maybe they even ended their own life. What's the difference? And the American Psychology Association has a lot of research on this. There's a Resiliency project right here in Fairfax County. Resiliency is really a learned behavior. When we're surrounded by loving and caring family and friends, we do better. When we are comfortable venting and sharing strong emotions, we do better. When we are always optimistic about the future, and when we basically have that positive view of the world and ourselves and use those self-concept skills. Carnegie Foundation. So they said this is what all of the children need for success. 3 or more adults involved in their lives in a significant way besides their parents. Then that sense of safety, security, and belonging and our home, school, and neighborhood is so important. And then organized activities. They're important for everybody, not just those that might be gifted or really excel. And then volunteer work. There's a great quote. I'm not sure I can get it quite right, but here it is. Perhaps the only way for an adolescent to find themselves is through service to other people.
This has been Community Keynotes, Safeguarding Mental Wellness, recorded at Woodson High School in Fairfax, Virginia, with psychologist Scott Poland and suicide prevention specialist Richard Lieberman. If you believe that you or a child you know may be in crisis, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. For more information on how to build resiliency and mental wellness, visit this website. If you'd like to know more about the Community Keynotes series, please visit the Fairfax Network website at www.fcps.edu/Fairfax Network.